Right. Well, in Zagreb it's 5 minutes past 7, so it must be 5 minutes past 6 here, so I shall start the meeting. Good evening and welcome. I have some housekeeping to do first. We're not expecting fire alarms. If there is a fire, exits are there, and we meet by the flagpole outside on the car park on the front. Loos, if you need them, are just through there on the right. And that's it. So could I have apologies for absence and substitutions, please?
We have apologies from Councillor Carlo Guglielmi, substitutes by Councillor Coley, and from Councillor George Roderick.
Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Can I confirm and sign these as a true record of the minutes? Aha! Welcome. That's all right. Welcome. I've only just started, so you haven't missed anything. I'll say thank you. Councillor Skills. And who else was on the committee? Jane, were you? Good, super. And Jane seconding. Councillor Chapman seconding. All right. Any matters arising from those minutes? I'll take that as a no. Thank you. Declarations of interests. Anyone have any to declare? Any interests? No. Excellent. We don't have anything to procedural rule 37, do we? No. Questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 37. I've received none. I'll now move on to number 5, public speaking, of which we have three people who wish to speak on agenda item 1. This agenda is in 3 parts, and I'm going to go parts 1, 2 and 3. So part 1, may I call Mr. Marshall, please? How many minutes?
Who's timing?
Yes, good evening, please. I think we know the rules, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you for letting me speak. Some of the members are new committee members, so here we go. I ask the members do not recommend to full council approval of the additional Sustainable Appraisal main report, only made available on Friday the 12th of July and not included in the public document pack. There are simply too many documents and too much evidence to take in and consider in such a short period of time. I recommend members should delay, defer and consider, otherwise the inspector will find these proposals unsound again. Let full council put their necks on the line and make the decision. The residents have been excluded from these proposals, and tendering will end up with unwanted garden communities or cities and even new towns. The infrastructure is a major keystone, and the rapid transport system is a must, but the rapid transport report is found to be wanting. The borrowing of £2 billion will burden local residents for generations. Figure 216 shows the tendering Colchester border garden community proposing to take Grade 1 listed agricultural land. At the last planning committee meeting, Chair Councillor Turner successfully argued against garden grabbing. Surely this will be garden grabbing on a huge scale. So I ask members not to recommend to full council and instead delay, defer and reconsider. Otherwise the inspector will find these proposals unsound again. Let full council risk their necks. Members may ask me, what do I propose? Well, Wednesday 27th of September 2016, I gave a plan to Gary Guyver called the DRPP, which is now the Alternative 7 in the document pact, and now transferred to the East 4 in the ASA. Also available, if you want to ask questions, is the Rapid Transport System floating train, which a little model up there can help you see what the idea of a rapid transport system that will appease a lot of the problems with urban and rural problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Councillor Scott.
I just want to know whether, once the questions have come forward, is officers going to respond to every speaker now and then have a speaker, or are we going to wait till all three have done?
No, they won't be responding to any because this is statements. So we just take on board what they've said, and then if you wish to follow them up and ask the officers, you can do so.
Don't you think it'd be better if officers do actually respond?
No, it's not what our rules say. These are statements. This is not a debate. These are statements.
It'd be interesting, though, Chairman.
Yes, it might well be, Councillor Scott, I don't disagree, but that's the rules that we play by. And the ones are, these are statements, we listen to them, we take them on board, consider them, and then if you have any questions yourself, you can go direct to the officers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. May I call Mr. Gittins, please?
We've reached a critical point in the local plan preparation process, and it's worthwhile pausing to consider the local plan inspector's advice. He stated as follows: on the basis of the evidence I have considered so far, I would advise that simultaneously bringing forward 3 garden communities on the scale proposed in the submitted plan is likely to be difficult to justify. That is because of the difficulty of coordinating the provision of infrastructure, particularly large-scale transport infrastructure, with the development of the garden communities. In particular, it is very unlikely, in my view, that the whole of the rapid transit system could be provided quickly enough to support commencement of all 3 garden communities on the timescale proposed. The NEAs appear hell-bent on proving the inspectors' fears are unjustified by seeking to demonstrate that all 3 garden communities can be promoted together and that mass transit will be in place in time. Councils ignoring the inspectors' advice do so at their peril, and failure to convince on these 2 counts will have catastrophic consequences for the local plan. Time, therefore, to focus on an amended strategy to better reflect the inspectors' advice. Tendring has set its sights on promoting a large-scale garden community on the western edge of the district, relying on mass transit links to the west, not better connections to Tendring. It is little more than a Colchester overspill scheme. Surely the time has come for Tendring to stand on its own 2 feet, become more self-contained, self-reliant, and independently more sustainable. You have a golden opportunity to exploit the economic potential of a transportation and employment hub where the A120 and A133 diverge. Tendring Central. Employment-led growth here on a 25-acre business park at an omnidirectional oasis roundabout and a 50-acre industrial estate would revitalise the economy of the whole district. A scaled-down garden community in the form of a 5,000-dwelling garden village would be linked to a new railway station on an undeveloped line-side frontage at Thorrington by shuttle bus services running between Tendring Central, Brightlingsea and along an improved 1029. Huge investment in mass transit will not be necessary, and the scheme is of more human scale than can be handled in-house by yourselves without the need for external delivery vehicles. The Tendring Central scheme linked to the Metro Plan strategy, which the inspector insists should be actively considered, offers a huge opportunity to redistribute growth eastwards and make the district more self-contained. With respect, redirecting your strategy now to reflect the local plan inspector's advice and concerns should avoid the pain and embarrassment that will inevitably result from an unsound plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gittins. May I call Miss Bannister, please?
Thank you for letting me speak this evening. I'm a resident of Wheeley, and my views reflect those of the vast majority of people living in our parish. For reasons I will express very briefly, I believe the only way forward is to support proposals for garden communities, but not on the vast scale that is proposed. Surely these numbers being quoted across North Essex are totally unrealistic and unachievable, both in terms of viability and the harm that will be experienced by existing residents. Ours is, in the main, a rural, agricultural, tourist and retirement area, and needs to remain as such. However, at the present time, our lives have become a continual struggle to preserve the identity of our villages. Wheeley is the smallest of Tendering's rural service centres, with a current housing stock of approximately 500 dwellings. Yet a summary of the draft findings for this additional sustainability appraisal confirms that the Council's proposals within the Section 2 plan are for a housing growth of 57%, which sticks out like a sore thumb on the list of some of the settlements across the three authorities that can be found on pages 6 and 7 of this document. This is disproportionate, unfair and contrary to national planning policies. Furthermore, Wheeley Heath is categorised within Tendering's submitted local plan as a smaller rural settlement that should have minimal development. Yet this community is now constantly under attack from opportunistic developers, and there is most certainly not a local need for this destructive expansion. It must not be allowed to continue. So what's my suggestion? Well, I have looked at the alternatives to garden communities, and I just feel there's no way but to follow garden communities in some way. And as one would expect, the one that is of most concern to me, that is an alternative, is E6, the Calls Metro Plan, that proposes disproportionately large developments at Alresford, Great Bentley, Wheeley and Thorpless Oaken, which have stations along the Colchester-Clacton railway line. And this sustainability appraiser will assess the four areas separately. I don't know whether you're aware of the numbers. They're proposing 700 at each by 2033, aiming at a final total beyond of 2,000 at each. I have concerns over the way the proposal is being presented and would refer you to page 14, section 4.27, which is very important because the last sentence begins with the words, "It is being promoted by local people." Well, it's local people on West Colchester and East Braintree, not the Tendring area. Calls represents the words, "the campaign against urban sprawl in Essex." That's misleading. Here we have a group of members of the public from West Colchester, East Braintree, Coggeshall, who began by campaigning against the huge West Hay garden community, but now appear to be campaigning against the other garden communities as well. They are most certainly not local to the four villages they are proposing to destroy. The information as it stands, as I said, is misleading and unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bannister. We now move on to the first part of the full agenda. Our agenda tonight is all 547 pages of it. As Giles Watling MP pointed out to me, it is only 20 pages or so short of the Brexit Treaty. And it's in three parts, and I'll take each part separately. So the first part, recommendations, are on pages 14 and 15, refer to the additional sustainability appraisal and other evidence for the local plan, and in particular the garden communities. The Inspector, when reviewing our previous sustainability appraisal and other evidence, asked some searching questions of us, Colchester Borough Council, Braintree District Council and Essex County Council, our partners. We have a duty of cooperation with and to them, and all three local planning authorities are progressing a similar agenda to us at the same time. I will now ask Mr Guyver to take us through the first part of our agenda.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our new local plan is in two sections. The first section has been prepared in cooperation and partnership with our neighbours in Colchester and Braintree and contains proposals and policies that are strategic, long-term in nature, including 3 proposals for new garden communities along the A120 corridor. The second part of the local plan is more specific to tendering, and Colchester and Braintree have equivalent versions of their Section 2 local plans separately, but this report is concerned with Section 1. The 3 garden communities, as I say, are proposals located on the A120 corridor, one to the west of Braintree, one crossing the Colchester-Braintree border in the Marks Tay area, and the other one crossing the tendering-Colchester boundary between the A133 and the A120 to the east of Colchester, between Colchester and Elmstead Market. The garden community proposes between 7,000 and 9,000 homes in total over a 30 or so year period, with 2,500 of those expected to be delivered within the period of this local plan to 2033, of which half would count towards Colchester's requirement for housing and the other half would count towards tendering's requirement for housing. The statutory process that we have to follow in preparing a local plan includes public consultation, of which there have been 3 rounds already, and an examination undertaken by a government-appointed planning inspector, whose job is to, 1, check that we have met our legal and procedural requirements, and 2, to check whether the local plan meets with the requirements of national planning policy, and we call those the tests of soundness. The examination hearings for the Section 1 local plan took place at the beginning of 2018, and in June we received a letter from the inspector setting out his interim findings. On the positive side of things, the inspector confirmed that the councils had complied with the legal and procedural requirements of the planning system. He also agreed the soundness of the housing and employment targets set out in the plan for the 3 authorities. And he also praised the authorities and their ambition in proceeding with proposals for garden communities, although he had some reservations and some concerns about them, which leads us to the point that we are now. He raised some concerns about the justification for having garden communities as opposed to an alternative strategy for growth, and also had concerns about the deliverability and viability of the proposals put forward for a range of reasons set out in his letter of the 8th of June. At that time, he gave the 3 authorities 3 options for how to proceed. The first option was to take the garden communities out of the plan and adopt what was left over, but on the understanding that we would review the local plan within 3 years to plan for longer-term growth with other sites. The second option was to prepare additional evidence to demonstrate to the inspector that his concerns can be addressed. And the third option was to scrap the plan and start again. The 3 authorities agreed last year that they would prepare the evidence required to justify and to support the deliverability of the proposals in the plan. So what we have here is a report of the evidence that has been prepared directly in response to the concerns raised by the planning inspector in his letter of June. First, I'd like to talk about the sustainability appraisal, which has already been mentioned by some of our speakers tonight. Now, a sustainability appraisal is a statutory requirement of the planning system enshrined within UK and European law, which requires all plans and proposals to be assessed for their potential environmental impacts. And that assessment is to inform the local authority's decision on which strategy to proceed with. The inspector considered the sustainability appraisal prepared for the local plan previously, and he felt that it was biased towards the proposals that the councils were promoting. he felt that some of the assumptions made within the appraisal were biased towards the proposal that the council was proposing, and on that basis he felt it was an unreliable source of evidence on which to base a decision to promote garden communities. Helpfully, the inspector provided some very, very clear guidance as to what he would expect to see in a sustainability appraisal in order to address those concerns. And LUC, land use consultants, are the consultant that have been employed by the three authorities to undertake additional sustainability appraisal work, responding directly to the concerns raised by the inspector. A summary of the findings is attached as Appendix 1 within your agenda on page 47. The full report, which Mr. Marsh was absolutely right, is huge in scale, is on the Braintree District Council website, because Braintree are hosting all of the documents for the examination, and you would have seen the email that went out to point that out, and it's also a link at the end of the report. The methodology for the additional work carried out by LUC was developed through engagement with objectors to the plan, developers with alternative proposals, campaign groups that had attended the examination last time, and was also been passed by the inspector as an appropriate method to which to proceed. So we are confident that LUC have taken on board what the inspector said. Their methodology has been ratified by the inspector, and there has been full opportunity for those participating in the inquiry to influence the content of the methodology. The sustainability appraisal follows a two-stage process. The first stage is an assessment of a variety of different sites throughout the three boroughs, and the second part of the assessment is an assessment of different combinations of those sites to set out a series of what we would call reasonable alternative strategies, alternatives to the strategy that is currently in the plan for the regarden communities. That assessment has now been undertaken, and the results of the assessment set out in the summary are that actually a lot of the options perform very similarly against the criteria set out in the assessment. For some of them, there's not much to choose between them. So we are left to make judgment on planning grounds as to what is the best way forward. But there is nothing in the evidence that has been produced by LUC to suggest that the North Essex authorities have got the strategy wrong. There's nothing in there to suggest that a combination of three garden communities is wrong, and there's nothing in there to suggest that any of the alternatives are notably better than what is being proposed. We've had three speakers tonight. Mr. Marshall, who is advocating a proposal, the Deliverable People's Plan, on the northeastern edge of Colchester. That proposal has been assessed as part of this assessment, and the conclusion is that it's no better than what's being proposed, and in fact there's a specific concern about the impact that that development would have on a SSSI, a site of scientific special interest, Bullock Wood. We've had the description of tendering central from Mr. Gittins. Again, that is a strategy that has been assessed as part of the sustainability appraisal. And the issue with that, it performed fairly similarly, it's fair to say, to the garden community that we're proposing. But being further from Colchester, there's a greater likelihood that it will generate more car-borne journeys. And also, it doesn't deliver the specific benefits to the economy, and in terms of infrastructure provision, we say, to the proposal for the garden community. He also mentioned that the tendering central proposal be promoted in combination with Metro Plan. Now, let me just spend a little time on Metro Plan, because Mrs. Bannister was right to raise it. Metro Plan is Cause's alternative proposal for a spatial strategy. Now, the reason why it's been given a lot of time in the sustainability appraisal and has been treated as a serious proposal is that we have to judge all of the different strategies on an equal footing to ensure that there's no bias. The Cause Metro Town proposal is a development that would direct development towards Alresford, Great Bentley, Wheeley and Thorpe-le-Soken over and above the quite significant developments that have already been granted planning permission in those areas or are expected to come forward. The assessment of the Cause Metro Plan suggests that because some of these new settlements would be much further and in rural locations away from Colchester, they are more likely to generate car-borne traffic. And we're talking about big numbers potentially, and these are numbers and advice that's been provided to the consultants directly by Cause, the campaign against urban sprawl in Essex, and has been assessed on that basis to ensure that there's no question of bias or impropriety in assessing their proposal. The garden community proposed in the plan is a stronger alternative, reading the results of the sustainability appraisal. If I move on to other pieces of evidence that will be provided to the inspector, one of his concerns was about the funding for key pieces of infrastructure, particularly those expensive pieces of infrastructure like new roads and major improvements to roads. Now, at the time, we didn't have the answers that we needed for the inspector, but now we have HIF bids with the government. HIF is Housing Infrastructure Fund bids to actually pay or forward fund the A120, A133 link road, the rapid transport scheme to serve the garden community, and the realignment of the A12, which is more relevant to the proposal at Marks Tay. Announcements from the Secretary of State are understood to be imminent, and on announcement that the funding has been granted, if that's what happens, the schemes need to be completed by April 2024, which would allow the garden communities to proceed and addressing the concern raised by Mr. Gittins. The dualling of the A120 to follow a new route between Braintree and Kelvedon is expected to be delivered by 2028, and the funding is already committed to that by the government. So we can update on the inspector on those items. We didn't have that information for him last time. We will have that information for him this time. Rapid transit, evidence has been prepared on rapid transit. The inspector was concerned about the feasibility, costs, timing of a rapid transport system to serve the garden community and to provide fast and direct connections to all the facilities through Colchester. And Mr. Gittins rightly highlighted some of the concerns that the inspector had. But additional evidence has now been produced, which is a summary is in Appendix 2 of your agenda, which demonstrates how a rapid transport system can be developed and integrated into the garden communities, initially in the form of a rapid bus service, but future-proofed to enable new technologies and emerging forms of transport provision to be integrated at a later stage, thus not holding up the development. Housing delivery. The inspector was also concerned that the rate of houses being proposed was too ambitious, and that the scale of development being proposed wouldn't be delivered in the timescales envisaged. But higher rates of house building are critical in some locations to the viability of a scheme, and that's particularly the case for the Marks Tay development. So research has been undertaken now to demonstrate that the high rates of housing development that had been promoted as part of the garden communities can be achieved based not only on real-life examples, but also on the rhetoric of government and their ambitions to boost the supply of housing development. And we can provide that evidence, which is provided at Appendix 4, to the inspector now to quell those concerns. I'd like to talk a little bit about viability, economic viability. If something's not economically viable, it just won't happen, and no one will invest in it. The inspector was concerned about the viability of the garden communities, mainly because he felt that over-optimistic assumptions had been made about certain costs involved in the garden communities and certain assumptions about the phasing and timing of those garden communities, and that led him to have concerns whether they were viable. To address the concerns directly raised by the inspector, consultants have undertaken an additional viability study which are based on more robust cost assumptions. For example, we now have more information about how much rapid transport can cost and other infrastructure costs as well. They've also included greater levels of caution, greater levels of contingency. They've included greater allowances for inflation, greater allowances for an increase in interest costs on the purchase of land. And through the evidence that has been produced by the consultants, it demonstrates that all three garden communities are viable. The west of Braintree is the most viable because it benefits from higher property values, which makes that one more viable. The Marks Tay one is viable, but is more reliant on the HIF funding that we have bidded for through Essex County Council in order for it to deliver at a viable level. And the Tendring Colchester one is also viable based on the evidence provided here, but again, the HIF funding grant to forward fund rapid transport and the A120, A133 link road will cement the viability of this scheme and ensure that it delivers within the timescales envisaged. Appendix 5 includes a summary of the viability evidence. Employment. There is a target for each house created as part of the garden communities to be matched by a new job. But the inspector was concerned that although we had this target for one job per household, there wasn't enough information in the plan to explain how much land would be allocated for employment uses, business and industrial uses. Now, we said at the time that will be something for a future, more detailed plan for the garden communities. But the inspector wasn't happy with that. He wants more evidence. He wants more of an assurance about how much employment land would be delivered. A study has been undertaken, which is attached in full, I understand, as Appendix 6, that looks at economic projections, the amount of employment that is likely to be generated over the period of time envisaged alongside the housing, and translates that into the amount of land required for business and industrial uses specifically. Not all of the jobs will be on industrial parks or in business parks. A lot of the jobs would be in the service sectors, as you would expect of a development of this scale. But at least with this evidence now, we can allocate sufficient land within the garden community to meet the needs of the business and industrial sector going forward. For the Tendring Colchester garden community, the study recommends 7 hectares be delivered before 2033 and 25 hectares in total for the full build of the garden community project. And there are equivalent figures for the other 2 garden communities as well. They're the main pieces of evidence that I wanted to highlight to you. Other elements are contained within the report and on the Braintree website. The 4 reports are all there to see. Quickly, with other pieces of evidence, there is a modal share strategy that explains how to encourage the use of rapid transport services and walking and cycling to reduce the amount of car usage. There is a phasing and delivery report which can explain how the developments can be phased alongside infrastructure, and it's important to have some of those assumptions because they are key to the viability assessment, having an indication of how the development is likely to be built out, in what direction and what infrastructure would be provided. There's also papers from our legal advisors on how this scheme could be delivered through a local delivery vehicle, a partnership between the public and private sectors, one of the options available to the authorities. And there's also a new habitats regulation assessment, which is a requirement of European law, which needed to be updated following a change in the way that these assessments are carried out following a court case. Again, that indicates that there's no need to change the strategy that we've got in the plan. All of the impacts can be mitigated. The overall conclusion from the sustainability appraisal and all of the evidence that I've explained to you tonight is that we consider as officers that this evidence responds directly to all of the concerns that the inspector set out in his letter. It is not proposed, therefore, to change the overall strategy proposed in the Section 1 local plan. The recommendation is that we stick with a strategy that proposes 3 garden communities on the A120 corridor in the locations already proposed. Other reasonable alternatives have now been tested. They've been tested on level grounding with the garden communities, but none of them are considered to offer the same mutual benefits in terms of housing growth, in terms of the economic opportunities for employment growth, and the proficient delivery of infrastructure. It's therefore recommended that we stick with the current strategy. Now, I'll move on. There's not much more from me, you'll be pleased to hear. But we now move on to amendments. Although we're not proposing to change the overall strategy, we are putting forward for your consideration a number of amendments to the Section 1 local plan, which are set out in a table in Appendix 12 to your agenda. And that is a good question, Councillor Scott. 175. Now, those amendments mainly to the wording of different policies and supporting text within the plan do not alter the overall strategy for growth, but they have arisen through some of the matters that were discussed at the examination last year and include relatively minor adjustments, but some of the notable things is a new policy on recreational avoidance mitigation strategy, which Report 3 is all about, to ensure that the local plan complies with European law. That was a suggestion from the inspector and Natural England. We will include the employment land targets within the Section 1 plan, which were absent before and which the inspector criticised. And there will also be a mechanism set out in the plan to explain what happens if, for whatever reason, the garden communities don't go the way we expect and that the infrastructure is not committed in the time required for those developments to come forward. And it will set out that we would review the local plan if those circumstances arose. And that will satisfy the inspector that we have a plan B if need be. It's up to the inspector, ultimately, if they accept any of the amendments, and what they would do is they would propose them as formal modifications following the examination, which would then be published for formal consultation. But the inspector has asked us to consult on them before the examination resumes so he can get a feel for what people think about those changes and whether he wants to actually propose them as formal modifications. As I say, that's set out in Appendix 12, and we're only looking to put them out to consultation. Then they go on to the inspector. So if I turn now to what we're asking the committee to consider and to do tonight, we're asking you to consider the findings of the sustainability appraisal, which I've explained to you. We're asking you to consider the additional evidence that I've set out and the proposed amendments, and to recommend them to full council for approval on the 6th of August. And the intention would be that all of this documentation, the sustainability appraisal, the amendments, the additional evidence, would be published for 6 weeks public consultation to allow people and any interested parties the opportunity to actually comment on those documents before they are then sent to the examination inspector to resume the examination, so he can see what we produced and what people think about it. It's very important that all three councils, Tendring, Colchester and Braintree, come to the same conclusion in regard to this evidence and submitting it to the inspector. Braintree are meeting on Thursday. Their committee is meeting on Thursday. But like Tendring, they also have to seek full council approval. Colchester's committee meeting is on Monday, the 22nd of July. But unlike Tendring and Colchester, all of the local plan is delegated to their committee, so they don't need to go to full council. So if I can, so I've explained the next steps. The information would be sent to the inspector following the consultation. He would resume the examination, and if all goes well and the inspector is satisfied that that evidence addresses his concerns, arrangements can then be made to adopt the Section 1 local plan, and following that, the examination of Section 2 local plan can be organised. If I can please refer you, members, to page 14 of your agenda, I just want to go through the recommendations. So critically, tonight, we are asking the committee to make a recommendation to full council. Okay? Now, the recommendation to full council is A, that the additional evidence base, which I've described tonight, and which is summarised with appendices 2 to 11 of the report, and available in full as background papers on the Braintree website, are accepted as part of the evidence base for Section 1 of the submitted local plan. Okay? So we're looking to accept that evidence. B, we want full council to approve the findings of the additional sustainability appraisal work, which is summarised in Appendix 1, and which I've explained tonight, which appraises the submitted local plan strategy for the garden communities and the reasonable alternatives to that strategy. And it's important to note that the sustainability appraisal, being a statutory part of the plan-making process, definitely needs that full council endorsement. C, we're asking full council to agree the additional sustainability appraisal work and the evidence base, which I've explained, and to agree that it supports the existing spatial strategy for growth set out in the local plan, i.e. the proposal for 3 garden communities. And in doing so, it accepts that that strategy is justified as being the most appropriate strategy. And on the basis of my recommendation to you tonight, members, officers believe it is. D, we're asking full council to approve the schedule of proposed amendments to the submitted local plan, which I've just explained, are attached in full as Appendix 12. E, that a 6-week public consultation on the schedule of proposed amendments, the additional sustainability appraisal work and the additional evidence base be undertaken starting on the 19th of August 2019 and ending on the 30th of September 2019. Now, of course, that's subject to the other 2 councils agreeing the same. F, following that period of consultation, all of the documents I've described above, along with any duly made representations, so the comments that we receive in response to that documentation, will be submitted to the Secretary of State so that the local plan inspector can resume and complete his examination of the Section 1 local plan. G. The Council requests the local plan inspector to recommend any further modifications to the publication draft local plan as necessary to make it sound. So if he still has concerns about the soundness of the plan, but they can be fixed through modifications to the plan, rather than leaving us in the dark, we have formally requested that the inspector tells us how to change the plan to put it right. And we have to formally request that, and I think it's helpful for the inspector to provide some clear advice if that was the outcome. Chairman, I've run through the recommendations, A through to G, and I'll hand back to you now.
Thank you, Gary, for that excellent presentation. Very well done, thank you. Right, questions, members? Councillor Bush.
Yeah, I have issues with these recommendations, and to receive a document of 540 pages to go through, which is very important, in 7 working days, and make a decision tonight, I just feel like morally I can't. There's so much in here that it needs attention to, and to only be given 7 days is unrealistic. Certain parts of these documents that produced, I think it's the RAMS Part 3, that information was available in January, and it's all bound together in one hit. We should be given this information as we go along, rather than put it in front of us in such short space of time. So my view is that to defer this, or provide some sort of working group to actually address this, but timescales I think are too tight, and to present this in front of, or recommend it go in front of full council 6th of August, again it's exposing new councillors that can make decisions on this within a couple of weeks. So that's my view on the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Bush. Would you like to?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, the officer report that's been prepared, planning is an incredibly complex profession. There are numerous documents that are produced in support of the local plan. Although it's preferable that everyone reads every single one, it's not feasible necessarily to do that. Therefore, I set out very clear summary of the issues within the officer's report, and I make recommendations based on my professional views on that information to allow members to make an informed decision. What I would also say about the amount of information is that we have done briefing sessions with councillors in the run-up to this committee meeting to really explain in advance the work that's being done so that there's no shock on the night. But these documents, councillor, do run into the hundreds of pages, but the key conclusions, which I've set out tonight, are really on the basis on which I make my recommendations to you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Guyver. Do you wish to come back, Councillor Bush?
Well, yeah, other than really, I'd accept what Gary Guy was saying, but the detail, to actually review that, it's just insufficient time that actually to make an informed decision. And you can't make an informed decision without going through through the nuts of this. And I just feel that it's too premature for me to make a decision on that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Scott. I'll take Councillor Allen after Councillor Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I sympathise with Councillor Bush, and Councillor Bush is correct that we have new district councillors that have just recently been elected in May. We had all members briefing a few weeks after that, and now this. It's a very meaty document. What could have happened is councillors could have received smaller chunks of each item, sent to them, read it through, and then perhaps another additional document and another one, then getting this through your letterbox and expect you to read all this for this meeting and then full council. I assume we're going to get all this again in our full council agenda. I think it's going to be even meatier. So I think it would have been better if it was laid out in smaller chunks. I know you, Mr. Guyver, you was going through this, and I was kind of following you but it doesn't say on here Appendix 4, 5, so on. I wish you had that in bigger letters now, because I couldn't see it on here. I was following through in some respect, but perhaps maybe refer to page numbers at the same time. In terms of the 6-week public consultation, I may have brought this up at the all members briefing, but I'd like to know what our plan is for that, because there are people up here who have come to our meetings today. We usually have our local plan meeting at Clapton, where more people turn up. I'd like to know how we were proposing to go out to consultation. We can't just use it online. I did suggest at a meeting that maybe we have an exhibition maybe in the west of the district, because it is affecting a large chunk of West Tendring, and maybe have an exhibition in the west of the district. I know you said you was, Mr. Garvey, you was not sure how to do that or whether to do it or not, but I think it'd be very beneficial and useful for new councillors to come along, interact with our residents, people to listen to what's happening. I have other issues, regarding the transport system, rapid transport system. In today's Gazette, Councillor Luxford Vaughan, the neighbouring councillor of my ward, but in Colchester Borough, wrote a very good article in the Gazette pointing out the faults of the rapid transport system. I think we should also incorporate maybe our colleagues and neighbours in next door in Wivenhoe that are going to get a lot of this information. So maybe a joint Colchester Borough tendering consultation, so we can work together. I know we had a consultation previously at Essex University where we had people from both local authorities turning up and residents from across the border at Colchester Borough and tendering. I would like to see something like that in the 6-week public consultation, but I'm a little bit vague. I'd like more information on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Would you like to? Yes,
No, thank you,
Nearly promoted you there, Gary. Mr. Guyver.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I think the important thing to set out quite clearly is that this local plan, the submitted local plan, was the subject of 3 rounds of full public consultation in line with the regulations. We are not proposing to change the local plan in any fundamental way. So if we were to do a full consultation, we'd be consulting on what we've already consulted upon, which I think would add to confusion within our communities. This is a technical consultation to satisfy the specific concerns raised by the planning inspector when he looked at our plan and felt that he couldn't accept it. So the content of the documents are very technical, as has been sort of debated tonight. They're incredibly technical. They're not sort of friendly in terms of the local plan maps, in terms of showing where proposals are. That's already in the submitted local plan, which has already been subject to the 3 rounds of consultation where we went out into the community and met with people. This is very much a technical consultation to satisfy the inspector's concerns. So the idea is that it would be published on the website, there would be publicity in the press, there would be copies of all the documentation available in relevant libraries and council offices for those people that want to look through these documents and highlight any concerns they have about these documents to the inspector. Now, in terms of the suggestion of working more closely with Colchester on sort of a joint consultation, this is the consistent position of the 3 North Essex authorities, that this is a technical piece of consultation work to satisfy the inspector's concerns. There's no intention to hold a roadshow for this. And in terms of what Councillor Luxford Vaughan may have said about rapid transport, please be assured, Councillor Scott, as part of the HIF bid work, Essex County Council through Essex Highways will be undertaking a proper consultation on the route of the rapid transport system, and they're looking to do this later this year after this consultation. So that will be a full consultation with people able to comment on the different options for delivering rapid transport and also the different options for delivering the A133, A120 link road. So that will be a county council-led proper public consultation separate to the local plan, which people with concerns about those particular issues can get involved in. The other concern I've got about, I appreciate there are concerns in Wivenhoe about the proposals for the garden community, but they are on record as part of the work on the sustainability appraisal of suggesting that more development should go to Wheelie. They are also on record of asking us to explore the Metro Plan alternative, along with Cause. They're very close to Cause. So I treat with caution, I think, because there is a suggestion there that more development should be pushed into tendering. And I would find it very strange to think that the residents of Wivenhoe would prefer to see Metro Plan, which puts 2,000 additional houses on their doorstep at Alresford, rather than a completely comprehensively planned garden community to the north.
Thank you, Mr. Guyver. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I do apologise. Did you wish to come back on that, Councillor Scott? Thank you, Councillor Allen.
Sorry, Councillor Allen. I do appreciate what Mr. Guyver was saying, but the Essex County Council is saying that then it's not viable to have park and rides and they're losing money and everything else, and then all of a sudden, we're going to have a rapid transport system. You can't, it's the same person or the same office, Essex County Council, saying one thing about the rapid transport system and saying something opposite about park and rides. I mean, Councillor Luxon Vaughan does come up with some really interesting comments, and I think we should really seriously look at what she suggests and what she says, and because she's closely linked to Colchester Borough, and Councillor Corey, the leader of Colchester Borough, is also in Wivenhoe, and she has direct links with him and things, and her article is something to be looked at seriously. But in terms of the 6-week consultation, I know that you say there are people out there who it's all technical and may not be interested, but look, there are people here today that be interested. There's other people out there who will be interested to know what's happening. They may not necessarily have come to the previous shows. Okay, I went to most of them, but I'm a district councillor, and so other people may have done the same. But not going out to literally have one exhibition to listen to people, but just do it online or maybe visit the library. I don't think it's out of work personally. I think having an exhibition maybe in the west of the district, just a one-off exhibition during that 6-week period, I can't see a problem with that. And we're supposed to be open and transparent, and I would like us to be I like us to do that and inform our residents, but give people the opportunity to come to maybe an exhibition so they could see this. They may not understand it all, but there might be something they might want to have an interest in, like the rapid transport system. I think we should really do that.
No, thank you. Right, thank you very much for your comments, Councillor Scott. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chairman. It was an excellent presentation, and the work you've done on it is tremendous. But this is all geared to me. As I say, I'm not a new councillor, but I'm new to this. I was here last 12 years ago. So this is completely like a new councillor. I'm getting all this. And it was mind-boggling when it dropped on the mat. But there, I've gone through it. But everything's satisfying all the, not demands, all the wishes of the inspector. You've looked at it, you've done it, and you've done everything to make him happy. But there's a load of people that are not happy with this happening. The garden, we're all assuming that the garden, everyone wants it, and the way we're pushing it through, and it's not that case. was it 145 plus thousand people in tendering? Probably 1, maybe 2% really get into this type of council and that, and the others don't know till it hits them in the face. Now, going by, you know, you could present this, and we were asked to present this to the council for with our recommendation for it. But I've got a load of reservations on it. Perhaps I've got the wrong view, but to me, this just seems like a suburb of Colchester, this new town. And everything's geared Colchester. What we want to look for is for our local people here. And there was a suggestion by one of the speakers that about the Oasis site. I've got to be careful about that because that cost me my political career last time I was here. So, wrongly, but that was the... So, I don't think I could go along with a recommendation. Well, I won't personally, because I think we really need to look into it. And going through one job, one house, leave it alone. I mean, people have got 2, 3, 4 jobs to get a mortgage. So that, the way they do this, viability and stuff like that, I don't know, perhaps I'm talking like a right sort of amateur at this. Well, I am, because I picked up this book 7 days ago. Picked up the whole thing 7 days ago. And I really, although it's presented well, it's laid out, everything, but it's all geared that this is what the people of Tendring want. And I don't think it is.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Yes, thank you.
No, I appreciate, Councillor Allen, you're new to the committee and this is a lot of information that you would have seen for the first time. So completely appreciate the difficult position that you've got in coming to speed with everything that's happened before. But what I would like to make clear is that although you say the garden community is not necessarily what the people of Tendring want, through the work that's been done, we've looked at the reasonable alternatives to the garden community. And the reasonable alternatives that we looked at for the Tendring area is more development around our existing towns and villages. And those people that live in those towns and villages will probably say that we've had enough of additional development being tacked on here and there. Though that option raises a whole host of environmental concerns and concerns amongst our communities. The other option that's been looked at is Tendring Central, which Mr Gittins has put forward, and it scored respectably within the sustainability appraisal, but not as good as what is being proposed of the garden community. We feel it doesn't deliver the same benefits. And when we've done consultation on the Oasis option, for want of a better word, you'll remember, Councillor Allen, that we've been absolutely inundated with objections to that proposal. It's incredibly contentious. People definitely did not like it as a proposal. Which is the same wherever you go, really. Wherever you propose development, there is going to be a contention. And the other proposal is, as I've mentioned, the Metro Plan alternative, which is being pushed hard by cause. It's a serious proposal being put forward by a campaign group that are against garden communities. And that proposal involves more development at Alresford, more development at Great Bentley, more development at Wheeley, and more development at Thorpe. And I'm pretty sure, based on my bitter experience of dealing with planning applications in all of those locations, that they are not going to find support with the local electorate either. I think this is the best option long term for tendering, and that's why we're recommending it in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Guyver. Any other comments? Councillor Coley.
I've listened to the comments, and basically it seems that people just hadn't had enough time to consider the content of a document. So what is your alternative?
Thank you, Councillor Coley. Any comments? I think I'll move now to the recommendations. Do I have somebody recommend? Thank you, Councillor Newton will recommend it. Do I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Skills. If there's no more questions, I'll move to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendations as laid out on page 14 and 15, which is just for us to send these to full council for ratification. Remember that we're not making a decision. The only decision we're making tonight is to send these recommendations to full council. The actual decision will be made at full council.
Chairman, before
yeah.
Councillor Chapman, sorry. As councillors on this committee,
yeah.
Will we be able to speak again at full council?
Yes.
And the vote, whatever we vote tonight, we may vote differently at full council.
Yes, that's your right and choice, councillor.
No,
this is just as I said earlier, this is just a recommendation. If you look at resources and risk, which is underneath G, the penultimate paragraph, page 15, explains it completely what would happen if full council chooses not to accept these recommendations, assuming this committee accepts these recommendations to go forward.
And Chairman, will this be the only item?
No, we've got two more to get through. On full council? No, it won't. I don't know, honestly, frankly, I don't know. I'm just informed that there will be other items of business that night.
Well, that's a huge document. There have been councillors, a lot of councillors not here tonight who want to talk about it. It may go on longer than it.
Well, if that's the case, we may have to start earlier. And that would be up to, obviously, an assessment to be made by the chairman of this council. I will certainly tell him of your concerns, and that maybe we have to start earlier than that, because we do have a cut-off point, I believe, of 10 o'clock. So, if necessary, we may have to start at 6.
Okay.
So allow plenty of time for debate and to come to a full and proper conclusion.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, I have a proposer, I have a seconder for these recommendations to go to full council. All those in agreement, please show. That's 5. All those 6, 7. It passed. Thank you very much. Sorry, did anyone want to go against, or do I just mark you as 2 abstentions? No, I'll go against. Against. 2 against, 5, 7, 4. Thank you, that is passed. Right, well, that's... are we okay to go to the next item, or would anyone like a comfort break? Right, move on. Now on to our second part of our agenda. The recommendation is on page 242 and refers to our updated housing supply position, housing strategy and strategic land availability assessment, or SHLAA for short. Reminds me of a 60s pop tune. This becomes complicated by the updated MPPF and the need to use a different methodology, which results in a different 5-year land supply figure. The inspector agreed in his letter to us that 550 builds per annum is the correct demand, not the 863 arrived at by the new methodology. I will once again pass this over to Mr. Guyver to lead us through this particular maze. I do apologise. Sorry, before I hand over to... Sorry, Mr. Guyver. I'd forgotten. I do apologise. Two speakers. May I call Mr. Marshall again, please?
I'll forego.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Miss Bannister? Oh, A3. You're on A3. Sorry. Yeah, no, there's only one on A2. Sorry, I've just ordered some new spectacles. Yes, I know. I'm going to take A3 separately. Oh, did you wish to speak on A2? Yeah. Certainly, then please do so.
I left a phone message for Mr. Ford yesterday and did a confirmatory email this morning and then heard...
Nothing. Okay. Well, anyway, the floor is yours.
It's very good. Thank you.
Someone got their mic on?
Regarding item A2 on housing supply issues, tendering appears to have taken note of paragraph 60 in the 19th of February 2019 version of the NPPF, which stipulates that housing need assessments should be conducted using the standard method unless exceptional circumstances justify an alternative approach, which also reflects current and future demographic trends. In this evening's report on housing supply, the last few lines of the section entitled Implications and Relevant Appeal Decisions state that officers intend to continue arguing that unattributable population change is a material consideration that should be weighed in the balance when determining planning applications for housing until the Council can formally adopt the figures in the new local plan. And in their statements of case for current appeals, they've been producing robust arguments to support the 550 dwellings per annum figure, a figure you have endorsed again tonight. That is, all except for the Wheelie appeal regarding 280 properties, primary and nursery schools in an employment area, all accessed from a small cul-de-sac south of Thorpe Road, Wheelie. Surely this inconsistency needs to be explained to the planning inspector. The decision to invite the developer to resubmit the application with a different number was made behind closed doors, with tendering council claiming legal privilege, and this has left the Wheelers residents bewildered and quite angry, and it's seen as an unacceptable and unprecedented irregularity, to put it mildly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Bannister. Right, Mr Guyver.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mrs Bannister. I'll run through the presentation and pick up some of the points that have been raised as I go through. So this report, A2, is to report how many homes have been built in the last financial year, 2018-19, to set out the current 5-year housing supply position, which is important when we deal with planning applications in particular, to present you with a revised housing trajectory for the period of the local plan, and to report the Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, or SHLAA, which contains the technical evidence for the above. And that document has been prepared not by consultants, but your officers in-house. So house completions, for 2018-2019, the figure was 915. That is the highest it's been on record, I think the highest since the boom of the 1960s. It means that we've exceeded our target of 550 homes a year, 3 years running now. So we'd like to think that any arguments about us under-providing housing are being put right now with strong delivery of new homes. The Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, I don't want to say SHLAA because it's a real planner thing, that sets out the evidence and the assumptions that have been taken by officers in establishing how many new homes are likely to be built in the future on various different sites. Now that's in Appendix 1, which Councillor Scott is 253, and I apologise again, it hasn't got an appendix number on it. Page 253 is the assessment. It's quite a big document again, but quite colourful. We've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. Now, within that document, I can report to you that within the local plan, we have a requirement of 11,000 houses between the years 2013 and 2033. And the content of that report explains that around 3,000 of those have already been built. About 6,000 of those have planning permission already to be built. Around 1,000 are expected on smaller windfall sites, and the remaining 1,000 would be delivered on sites that are allocated in the new local plan, in the Section 2 local plan, which includes sites on the edge of Clacton and the site at Wheelie, which Councillor Bannister was referring to earlier. We're expecting 1,250 homes as our share of the development at the garden community, but we're not reliant on that garden community coming forward to deliver our tendering housing number. So that 1250 is an additional element of flexibility as far as we're concerned, and we're not dependent on it for housing purposes. So the content of the local plan is robust in terms of how much housing land it identifies, and there's no need, we say, to include any additional housing sites in the local plan. The housing trajectory is a projection of how many homes are roughly expected to be built between now and the end of the plan period in 2033. And to help out, I've put it on page 251 as part of the main body of the report. And what you see there is in blue, they are years that have already passed. So those are the numbers of homes that were delivered in those years. And you can see that it was very low in the first 3 years there as we recovered from the downturn. And then it suddenly went up to 658 last year, or no, a couple of years ago. And since then, we've been achieving the 550 home a year target. It's projected that over the next 9 to 10 years, we will continue to exceed that target, all very dependent, of course, on the state of the economy and the state of the housing market, but reasonable assumptions would suggest that we would exceed that requirement. And then towards the end of the plan period, up to 2033, it levels off a bit and stabilises a bit as the sort of booming housing sites coming forward comes to an end. And developments like the garden community are expected to deliver in that part of the plan period towards the end. 5-year housing supply. Now this is the interesting one. Now for the purposes of the local plan, we're in a healthy position because we can demonstrate that there's enough land allocated in the plan to deliver the 11,000 houses that we need to between 2013 and 2033. But we also have to, at any one time, we have to demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites, plus an additional buffer. Now, what that means for those members that perhaps not come across this before is to ensure that we hit our housing targets. The government wants us to be able to identify where the next 5 years of housing is going to come forward, and they want you to add a percentage on the top of that to make doubly sure that if for whatever reason certain sites don't come forward, you still hit your target. Now this is particularly important when dealing with planning applications, because if you can't demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites, then you have to determine planning applications for housing on their merits, even if they're not in the local plan. What you have to do, you're expected to approve planning applications for housing development unless the adverse impacts are significantly and demonstrably greater than the benefits, or the development would run contrary to national policy. And we call that, in planner speak, the tilted balance, which means instead of just saying it's not in the local plan, you can't have it, we have to say, well, actually, we haven't got a 5-year supply, so even though it's not in the local plan, we have to consider it and we have to weigh up the pros and the cons before we make a decision. And that's caused us all sorts of problems in the last few years, dealing with speculative planning applications as they come forward, and a lot of applications have been allowed on appeal because we haven't been able to demonstrate a 5-year supply. Now, the National Planning Policy Framework contains very strict tests on what you can consider as a deliverable site within your 5-year supply, and those tests are getting more and more challenging as the government strives to boost the supply of housing even more. Now, this is dealing with Mrs. Bannister's point. Now, if we to apply the 550 home a year target in the local plan, which has been endorsed by the local plan inspector, then we would comfortably be able to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply. But in February, the government made what appeared to be a very subtle change to the goalposts through changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, which effectively mean that until the local plan is formally adopted, we're not allowed to apply the figure in the local plan. When measuring housing supply, we have to use the figure that's generated using the standard calculation set out by the government. And that doesn't give us a target of 550 a year, it gives it a target of 863 homes a year. Now, to respond directly to Mrs. Bannister's question, the National Planning Policy Framework does say that you can use an alternative figure where it's based on robust evidence to demonstrate why you're doing an alternative figure, but you can only do that for the purposes of producing the local plan. You're not allowed to use that in the determination of planning applications. And they've sneaked it into one of the footnotes of the National Planning Policy Framework, which states clearly that when dealing with planning applications, if you haven't got an up-to-date and adopted local plan, you have to use the government figure. You just have to. There's no getting away from it. It's effectively sort of enshrined into the law of planning that you have to apply that larger figure. That's despite the fact that that higher figure is based on national population projections which for tendering have been demonstrated to be flawed. So this one-size-fits-all doesn't work for tendering, unfortunately, because the figure that the government produces is significantly higher than what the real housing need for tendering is. But we have to apply the government figure. We have no choice. If we could use the local plan figure, we would. So technically, as set out in the report, we can only demonstrate a 4-year housing supply, and it's only because we have to apply the figure that the government gives us. And it means that until the local plan is adopted, which is why it's good to get on with the local plan and get it adopted, we will continue to be in this position where we can't demonstrate a 5-year supply. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to just approve planning applications for housing when they come in. It does mean we have to do the weighing up exercise in looking at the pros and cons. And in doing that weighing up exercise, a material consideration is the fact that the planning inspector for the local plan has agreed with us that the figure in the local plan is based on sound evidence. So although we have no choice but to undertake the balancing exercise, when we undertake the balancing exercise, we can say, but the figure in the local plan is the real housing need for tendering. The government figure is overinflated, and as a material consideration, we feel that the benefits of this housing development don't outweigh the harm, because actually we don't need all of that housing. We only need the amount of housing that's set out in the local plan. Now that's the argument that we put in our statement of cases for all of the appeals that are coming up. And we had one inspector's decision at Edenside, Frinton, where the inspector was happy with that argument and he accepted that argument and dismissed the appeal. But we've also had another appeal inspector's decision at Lifehouse, and whilst the inspector dismissed the appeal for other planning reasons, when it came to looking at whether we had a 5-year housing supply or not, they rejected our argument and said, no, you've just got to stick with the government figure and that's it. I don't want to hear anything else about it. So it just shows you how difficult it is, because the inspector's decisions that are coming through are so inconsistent in terms of how they deal with this issue. But as set out in my report, which Ms. Bannister has clearly highlighted, is that we will continue to make that argument when it comes to dealing with applications and dealing with appeals, that the real housing need in tendering does not require all of that additional housing development. And whether we win those appeals or not, all I can guarantee you, inspectors, is we'll try our best to put that case forward. So the recommendation, if I can turn to that, which is on page 242. Is it? Or have I lied? It is, it's at the top. I can't even see my own recommendation. So tonight, members, I'm asking that the committee endorses the content of the report and the new Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, which is attached in full as Appendix 1, as evidence to support the deliverability of housing proposals in the new local plan and to demonstrate an up-to-date 5-year housing land supply position, with that caveat that actually, because of the government figure, it's 4. But that's what our housing supply position is. And for using that evidence for the purposes of determining planning application and contesting planning appeals. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Guyver. Any questions? Councillor Coley. I'll take you, Councillor Allen. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you.
Wasn't really a question. I was just saying thank you, Gary. I thought it was very clearly laid out. Thank you very much.
You're used to law, aren't you?
Yeah, thanks for that, Gary. That's almost a pity when you look at the statistics of facts back over the last 3 years. We're exceeding the 550 by something like 29%, aren't we? Which is really a pity that they can't look at that window of time and sort of reflect that back and say 550 is certainly achievable, we've done it, we're exceeding it, to keep penalising that. Which then brings me back to, obviously, the Part 1 issue. Obviously, the longer we're kicking that along the road, we're still leaving ourselves so exposed for the 863. Now, in terms of timescales, I think I've spoken to you about this before, is there no way we can close the window between Part 1 and Part 2 in terms of squeeze it together? Because if Part 1 rolls back out to spring or to next year, and we can't really look at Part 2 until then, when does that put us back in 2021 before we get the local plan into place? Perhaps you can give me some background on that. What do you think?
Mr. Guyver.
Yep. No, thank you, Councillor Bush. No, it's a very good question because, yes, whilst the local plan remains unadopted, we're stuck in this position where we've got to apply the government figure. The examination of the Section 1 local plan is important because Section 1 is where the housing target is contained. So the inspector for Section 1 has endorsed our 550. I mean, he hasn't guaranteed that that's definitely set in stone and he won't look at it again, but we'll take it. He's endorsed that 550. The quicker we can move on with Section 1 of the local plan and get that adopted, then that gives us the safety to then get on with Section 2 of the local plan in the knowledge that our housing figure has been set, hopefully at 550. There was just one, I missed a point from Mrs Bannister, Chairman, if you don't mind me taking that now.
Do please.
Mrs Bannister did ask about the development at Wheelie. I mean, that is a matter for the other committee, the planning committee, and I understand it is the intention that that item will be considered on the 30th of July.
Mr. Guyver. Any other questions? Comments? No? May I have a proposer then for the recommendation as laid out on 242?
I'd be happy to propose that, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fairley. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Coley. There's no more comments. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. Right, happy to go on to the third and final part of that break? Fine, we'll move on then. I have two speakers again. Mr. Gittins? You're not? Okay, fine. Sorry, Mr. Marshall. No, fine. Miss Bannister. You just wait a moment whilst people leave behind. Give people a chance to leave behind you. I understand that. Yeah, well, deliver it any way that suits you.
Finally, regarding item A3, I would like to emphasise the disappointment, despair and anger that would be felt by the residents of our area if, for example, part or all of Wheelie Hall Wood has to be closed to the public due to the significant increase in footfall that would occur were such disproportionate development to take place in our rural village. the Conservation Planning Coordinator for the Essex Wildlife Trust has written that the habitat at Wheely Hall Wood is irreplaceable and of national importance. And I'm sure that no type of procedure as outlined in the very comprehensive Essex Coastal Recreational Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy would cope with an influx of 700 dwellings, eventually rising to 2,000, plus 9 hectares of employment land, as outlined in Cause's Metro Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bannister. The third and final part of our agenda has a recommendation on page 331. This is to agree supplementary planning document, or SPID, that refers to the many and varied land designations that our coastline and near seas are subject to. Yet more acronyms, ZOE with an I, means a zone of influence. In plain English, the whole of our district falls under one or several of these. This means that all planning applications have to take into account their likely impact and effects on our SSSIs, Special Sites of Scientific Interest, RAMSAR, SPA, which is Special Protection Areas, and SACs, which is Special Areas of Conservation, etc. The third part is to agree that this consultation document, and that's what this is, it is a consultation document, that has been agreed by all 12 local planning authorities in Essex at officer level, is approved and will then go forward for public consultation, after which it will come back to us and this committee for approval, final approval. So on that, laying it out, I hand over to Mr Guyver to dot the I's and cross the T's. Thank you.
Thank you. There we go, talking too much. That's why I wore the battery out. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Mrs Bannister. So under European law, we as a council have a duty and a role in protecting internationally important wildlife sites, specifically those designated as SPA, SAC and Ramsar sites. And for our area, that's the Colne Estuary, Hamford Water and the Store Estuary. Now, part of our duty in that regard is to consider the effects and the cumulative impacts of new development on the habitats that occupy those areas, and either to avoid, mitigate or compensate against those impacts. Now, one of the potential impacts of new development, particularly housing development, is indirect recreational disturbance arising from an increasing population and the potential for more people to venture out to those wildlife areas for recreational purposes. Now, that could be a whole range of things. It could be trekking, water sports, dog walking is a popular one, for example. But the more the population grows, the greater the likelihood that you're going to get more people wanting to visit these places. Now, around each of these important wildlife sites is a defined zone of influence within which it's considered, so there's a high likelihood that new development will have an indirect recreational impact. And actually on pages 337 and 338 of your agenda, you will see that there's a plan showing the various zones of influence for the Essex and South Suffolk area, and indeed part of Kent by the look of it. And the important thing to note is that every inch of the tendering district falls within one or more of these zones of influence. And because of that, all new housing development in tendering, irrespective of its location, has the potential to cause this recreational disturbance to one of these wildlife sites. And the council has a legal duty to therefore consider that impact, and only granting planning permission if it can be demonstrated that that impact has been considered and can be avoided or mitigated. This is not just planning policy, this is the law. Now, to address the cumulative impact of potentially we've seen the numbers of houses that can come forward, the impact of new housing. This council has been working with Natural England, Essex County Council Place Services and 11 other Essex councils to develop a strategy to put measures in place to help minimise the potential for these impacts in response to population growth. Now, that document, which is quite a chunky one, is Appendix 2, which, Councillor Scott, is page 339. Sorry, I'm picking on Councillor Scott, but I'm sure it's beneficial to all of the members and anyone that's reading along. Now, that strategy includes a potential programme of measures that could be put in place to protect the wildlife areas concerned. And they include some of the following kind of ideas. So more information to explain the wildlife and habitats and their significance. A coastal code for visitors to abide by, a bit like the countryside code, but for people that visit those coastal areas. Maps provided in accessible locations that show routes that can be followed that take them away from the coast and away from those sensitive habitats. And it could be information on alternative sites where people can walk their dogs or enjoy their recreational time rather than disturbing the wildlife potentially in the internationally important areas. Now, this could be achieved through direct engagement led by rangers and volunteers. It could be information administered through websites and social media, and which could be more effective than all of those potentially is direct engagement with relevant clubs. So sailing clubs, ramblers clubs, dog clubs and local businesses to get that message out about the importance of those wildlife areas and how important it is to behave in an appropriate manner when you're in those locations. More physical interventions could, and I say could because these aren't ideas, it's not set in firm stone, but these are some of the measures that could be put in place, could include more physical interventions like fencing certain areas, waymarking or screening certain areas to direct visitors away from sensitive areas or to shield the impact of their activities from those areas. It might mean restrictions in certain locations on pedestrian access and dog walking and dog walking. It could be seasonal restrictions to try and encourage people away from those areas at the bird breeding season. It could be designated cycle routes that take people away from those sensitive areas, and a whole range of things which could involve looking at vehicular access and parking arrangements, having rangers on site to enforce those restrictions or to be a friendly guide to those people that turn up to explain to them the significance of those habitats and to advise them to behave in an appropriate manner. It could also be habitat creation, new creation of salt marshes or regulated tidal exchange, which may fit with the Environment Agency's plans for the shoreline in this part of the world. How do we fund it? There's a whole host of measures being suggested, but where does the money come from? Well, the theory is that the developers building new houses are increasing the population, and therefore these measures should be funded through financial contributions secured from developers that are building new homes. Now, already, to comply with the European law, we are already requiring developer contributions from all new housing developments in the tendering district to go into this project fund. The contribution is £122.30 per dwelling, which is a relatively small contribution in development terms. Some say they all add up, and of course they do add up, but most of the developers we're engaged with have been happy to make that payment. And this approach has also been endorsed by a number of planning inspectors dealing with appeals. Now, the draft supplementary planning document, and I must emphasise that it is draft because it's is a work in progress, albeit a relatively advanced one, is a document that's been prepared by the authorities working together with Natural England and with Essex Place Services, and it's designed to formalise the arrangement that's already been enforced. So although we're already seeking the contributions to ensure that we comply with European law, this supplementary planning document will provide a proper planning policy justification for those contributions, and will strengthen our case if anybody argues against it when we're dealing with appeals. As I say, it's been developed in partnership with Natural England, Essex, and other Essex authorities, and the further minor changes which I refer to, it might be needed, is because there's a lot of input going into it. There's also some legal advice as well, which might require a tweak here or a tweak there, and I'll come on to the recommendation and the significance of that in a minute. But it's proposed that once all of the Essex authorities are agreed to this version of the supplementary planning document, a public consultation exercise will be carried out, and that's expected to take place in late summer. Now, for supplementary planning documents, they don't need full council approval. They are in the jurisdiction of you as the committee. And consultations will take place in all of the district, but it will be managed overall by Essex Place Services because it's the same document for all of the councils across Essex. Now, if I can refer you to page 331, and I think it's important to say that after the consultation, what we do is we'll bring back the results of the consultation to this committee before any final decision is made to formally adopt it. So if people come up with good ideas and reasonable concerns that can be taken into account, we will, of course, endeavour to do so. Page 331 is the recommendation. A, to approve the draft Essex Coast Recreational Disturbance, Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy Supplementary Planning Document, deep breath, SPD, for consultation purposes, and to note the content of the RAMS strategy document, which is the larger of the two documents in Appendix 3. And the second part of the recommendation is to delegate authority to the head of planning to make any minor changes to the document necessary. Any changes considered by the head of planning to be more than minor would be reported back to the committee prior to any consultation commencing. So if it was a massive change, what we're not expecting, members, is that you approve this tonight, and if something massive changes, you won't find out about it. Don't worry about that. If something big has to change, we'll bring it back for your decision. But if it's just a tweak here, a tweak there, that authority would be delegated to the head of planning, if you are so willing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Guyver. Right, everyone understand that? Any questions, please? Councillor Bush.
Yeah, Gary, I'd be interested to see what the fund is at now. I saw the fund at February said 8,900. So do you know where we're at now with this mitigation package? And any of it been spent yet? Sorry.
I don't know the answer to that, Councillor Bush, if I'm completely honest with you. The pot is very small at the moment because when this requirement came in to charge with this, a lot of developments that had already obtained planning permission don't have to pay it because they're already under the wire, whereas this only affects those new proposals that come in. So at the moment, the pot will be very small. But over the period of the next sort of 15 years to the end of the plan period, it's predicted that something like 8 million would be collected overall for these projects.
Mr. Bush, if you turn to page 408, you'll see the projections. They are significant. And this is to fund a new inspectorate, RAMS inspectorate, which will basically be going around educating and such like. And one of the things that I should be asking to go into the consultation is that we actually we actually create more access to these places, because most of them are inaccessible. And I think that's wrong, and having gone over it, been into well over 100 national parks in the USA, from the smallest to almost the largest. I see how it can be done, and we don't do it in this country. And I'm hoping, and it is probably a forlorn hope, that we might be able to do something similar in Britain. And I think this is an opportunity. But that will be one of the things we can talk about. This is a consultation document. It's not a done deal. It is not a tablet of stone unless we choose to make it so. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here for us to improve our district and to offer greater access to these wonderful areas that we know about, and I've had the pleasure of seeing. And I think a lot more people should be able to see it as well. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I don't often agree with you, Councillor Turner, but...
well, I'd like that noted, please.
I know, I've just got one on the brow. Yeah, I fully agree with what you said, Chairman, because there are areas that you can't access, physically you can't get to. I mean, in the Blackwater Estuary, Curran Estuary area, between Brightonsea and Wivenhoe, you know, there are areas you can walk and areas you can't walk, and there are people who would like to explore those areas. So I fully support this. One thing I would like to ask, this £122, 32 or 85, how much is it?
£122.30.
Is it like when you build one house, say, one dwelling, and they would have to pay that, or is it collective? Like, for example, affordable housing, say, you have say a certain figure before they have to affordable housing kick in. Will this £122 kick in from one house to 1,000 houses?
Yeah. It would apply. This particular contribution would apply to even a single house.
Even the size.
Sorry.
The size of the house.
Yep, irrespective of the size, it's a fixed price per dwelling that is proposed for planning permission, and the way that we secure that money is through a legal agreement attached to the planning permission. And therefore, I think before they commence the development, they have to deposit this payment. And just to sort of in response to the comments being made by both yourself, Councillor Scott, and Councillor Turner, I think there are great opportunities to improve access to these areas, but they will be balanced with proposals to try and guide people away from those really sensitive areas in the bird nesting areas. So I think whilst there are opportunities which we should embrace, there will also be measures put in place to try and restrict some movement, because there are some areas where the species are of such great international importance that we want to keep people away from those quiet areas.
Right, thank you. Well, anyone wish to propose this? Thank you very much, Councillor Scott. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Skills. Unless there's any other further comments, I'll go to the vote. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimity once more. Thank you very much. Well, a big sigh. We've done it. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, I have. I'm sorry. I'm wrong again. A very good suggestion has come down the line to me, which I completely concur with. And thank you, Councillor Scott, Councillor Bush, Councillor Allen and Councillor Chapman for bringing it to our attention. All councillors will be sent a copy of this report within the next couple of days to ensure that they may have access to all the information for at least 2 weeks before the full council meeting on the 6th of August. Officers can offer another all-member briefing to councillors prior to the 6th of August, so that will be on offer as well. So hopefully that will answer some of the questions and some of the queries and problems that have been faced by this committee. And as it's the first one of the new council, that's very good news, so we'll make sure that in future you'll get as much notice as the officer can possibly produce, as quickly as possible, so we can make better informed decisions. Councillor Scott.
I'm conscious of the thickness of this, and I know this only just managed to go through my letterbox, and I'm conscious of the fact that the agenda is going to be bigger. It's going to be bigger. So I'm just worried that some of these documents going around may not necessarily reach our letterbox.
Get a bigger letterbox.
The report that goes to full council I think, was only about 200 and something pages. So, because there was 2 other reports that form part of this, so it would only be the report in relation to the local plan that would go. So that's
Section 1.
That's about half of the size of this.
No, it's only Section 1 that has to go to full council. The second and third part of our discussions today is just for us. It's just for us to make the decision. The other one is one where said we recommend to full council, and then we can have the debate again at full council. So you'll only get half of this. So that should answer that. Anyway, once again, many thanks to all. I close the meeting at 19:55. Thank you.